the lights, the roar, the endless banners waving in the cold air. For a moment, football feels like mythology giants clashing on sacred ground. Ordinary men transformed into warriors in helmets and pads. The National Football League has built itself into the most powerful sports empire in American life, commanding television screens, dominating Sundays, and seeping into every corner of popular culture. To many, it represents triumph, unity, and the drama of competition at its highest level. But hidden beneath that spectacle is another truth, darker and far more unsettling. Behind every kickoff, every touchdown, and every highlight reel, there are shadows. The shadows of broken bodies, fractured minds, and sacrificed lives. The story of professional football in America is not only the pursuit of glory, it is also the story of what glory demands in return. Consider this. The average NFL career lasts barely 3 years. For most, it ends not in the glow of championships, but in operating rooms, with knees rebuilt by metal, or in the quiet ache of concussions that never quite healed. The pursuit of glory asks for everything: your body, your health, your peace of mind, and often gives nothing back once the cheering fades. I think about the players who came before, men whose names rarely appear on television graphics anymore. Take Mike Webster, a Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Known as Iron Mike, he played 17 seasons, anchoring one of the most dominant teams in NFL history. To fans, he was a rock. To his teammates, a leader. But after retirement, Webster's life unraveled. He slept in his car. His memory failed him. He lived in constant pain, racked by the invisible consequences of countless hits to the head. When he died at just 50 years old, his autopsy revealed a condition that would send shockwaves through the sport: chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. His story was not an outlier. It was a warning, and yet, for every warning, the machine kept moving forward. Because football has always been about more than sport. It is ritual, theater, war played out on grass and turf. In towns across America, young boys are told that the field is where you prove yourself. Coaches preach toughness. Parents cheer from the stands. The path is narrow but seductive. Work harder than anyone else. Sacrifice more. And maybe, just maybe, you will reach the NFL. But those who do often discover that the cost is higher than anyone could have imagined. Some costs are physical: knees shredded by sudden cuts, shoulders dislocated from violent collisions, spines compressed by years of hits. The average NFL lineman spends a career absorbing the force of a car crash on nearly every snap. By the time they retire, many live with permanent damage. From arthritis so severe they cannot climb stairs to injuries that end careers before they truly begin. Other costs are hidden: mental health battles waged in silence, depression that creeps in once the stadium lights go dark. Studies have shown that former NFL players are more likely to suffer from cognitive decline, memory loss, and neurological disorders. For too many, the transition out of the league feels like free fall once defined by a uniform. They suddenly find themselves stripped of identity, money, and purpose. And then there are the costs no statistic can capture. The families left behind when a father cannot walk without pain. When mood swings, fueled by brain injury, tear households apart. When the chase for glory becomes a burden too heavy to bear. It would be easy to say that players choose this life, that they know the risks. But choice in football is never that simple. For generations, the NFL sold the idea that toughness could conquer anything. That pain was temporary, and that injuries were just obstacles to overcome. For decades, concussions were dismissed as getting your bell rung. Players were sent back into games minutes after staggering to the sideline, their heads still swimming. Careers were extended at the cost of irreversible damage. Glory was dangled like a prize, and everything else was considered secondary. And yet, even knowing this, players still chase it. Why? Because the allure of football is irresistible. To step onto an NFL field is to enter a world few will ever know the sound of tens of thousands rising to their feet. The knowledge that millions more are watching, the feeling of being part of something larger than yourself. It is intoxicating. It is also unforgiving. Football has given us legends, moments of beauty and triumphs that unite generations, but it has also demanded sacrifices we rarely acknowledge. The broken men who can no longer walk without pain. The funerals held too soon. The silent battles fought in empty houses long after retirement. This is the other side of the game, the side rarely shown in commercials or celebrated in highlight reels. When we talk about the true cost of glory, we must look past the touchdowns and the trophies. We must look at the reality of what it means to survive in a league built on collisions and sacrifice. The NFL is both spectacle and shadow, triumph and tragedy, greatness and grief. Its story cannot be told honestly without confronting both sides. This is the story of the NFL's competitive darkness, the empire built on sacrifice, the price athletes pay so that millions can cheer, the hidden toll that lingers long after the final whistle. Over the course of this documentary, we will peel back the layers. We will hear the voices of players whose bodies and minds bear the scars. We will examine the culture that glorifies toughness while dismissing vulnerability. We will confront the medical truths that shook the sport to its core. And we will follow the money, power, and ambition that keep the machine running, even as more lives are consumed by it. Because the NFL is not just a game, it is an institution, a reflection of American culture, and a test of what we value most, glory or humanity. And to understand its true cost, we must walk into the darkness. This is not a story about touchdowns or championships. It is a story about sacrifice, pain, and the fragile line between triumph and tragedy. It is about the players who gave everything, the families who carried the burden, and the system that continues to demand more. Football has never been just about the field. It is about what happens when the game ends, when the cheers fade, and when the body refuses to forget what the mind longs to escape. And so, we begin. When we talk about the National Football League, we often begin with numbers. In 2023, the Super Bowl drew more than 115 million viewers, making it the most watched broadcast in American history. The league generates over $18 billion in annual revenue, a figure that continues to climb as streaming, global markets, and corporate partnerships expand. In sheer influence, the NFL dwarfs nearly every other institution in sports. It is not just a league, it is an empire. And yet, behind every dollar earned, behind every record shattered, and every celebration held in confetti, lies a hidden economy of sacrifice. The purpose of this documentary is not to diminish what football has given us. The NFL has produced moments of extraordinary human achievement. It has forged legends like Jerry Rice, Walter Payton, Tom Brady, and Lawrence Taylor, athletes whose performances inspired awe and reverence. It has created memories that define decades. The catch, the immaculate reception, David Tyrese's helmet grab, Malcolm Butler's goal line interception. These moments remind us why the sport holds such power. They remind us why millions set aside their Sundays in ritual devotion. But what we seek here is balance, because for too long, the story has been told from only one side. The side of victory, of spectacle, of the bright lights. To understand the NFL honestly, we must confront the other side, the stories that rarely make highlight reels. The voices that echo not from the field, but from the shadows it leaves behind. This is a story of bodies and minds, of culture and expectation, of institutions that elevate men into heroes and then discard them when their usefulness fades. It is about what happens when the will to win collides with the limits of human endurance. And it is about what that collision tells us, not only about football, but about ourselves as a society that demands greatness at any cost. The theme of this exploration is simple, yet uncomfortable: the true cost of glory. To begin, we must consider what glory means in football. Glory is not merely winning a game, 'Tis permanence the idea that for a fleeting moment, your name belongs to history. For players, it means the possibility of carving out a legacy that transcends time. But glory is not free. For every man who raises the Lombardi Trophy, there are countless others whose names are forgotten, their sacrifices invisible. And even for those who achieve glory, the cost often lingers long after their final snap. The science tells us much of what the body endures. A study from the American Journal of Sports Medicine found that the average NFL player endures over 1,500 physical contacts in a single season, many of them at forces comparable to high-speed car crashes. Another study revealed that 99% of former Denial players' brains examined post-mortem showed signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Numbers like these strip away the mythology and confront us with biological truth. Football damages the human body in ways no cheering crowd can erase. But numbers alone cannot tell the full story. For that, we turn to the voices of those who lived it. Hall of Fame linebacker Jr. so once said, "You have to sacrifice yourself, your body. That's what it takes. And when it's over, you just hope you can still be standing." Years later, So would take his own life. His brain later diagnosed with severe CTE. His story is not an anomaly. It is part of a devastating pattern. And yet, for every warning, the cycle continues. Every year, new players enter the league, driven by ambition, by the dream of providing for their families, or by the sheer love of the game. They know the risks more clearly than ever before, but still they pursue it. That contradiction, knowing the price, yet still chasing the promise, lies at the heart of football's darkness. Why does the game command such devotion? To answer that, we must look at history. American football emerged in the late 19th century, born from the brutal collisions of rugby and the strategic discipline of military drills. Early football was violent, unregulated, and often deadly. In 1905 alone, 19 young men were killed playing the sport. The outcry led to the formation of the NCAA, intended to make the game safer. Yet, as rules evolved and equipment improved, one truth never changed. Football remained a collision sport built on physical dominance. The NFL itself was founded in 1920 in Canton, Ohio. In those early years, players earned barely enough to survive, often working second jobs to support themselves. But the culture of sacrifice was there from the beginning. Men accepted pain as the price of admission. They endured because the game promised meaning, status, community, and the chance to be part of something larger. By the mid-20th century, as television brought football into American homes, the sport became part of national identity. The NFL learned to package toughness as entertainment. Slow-motion replays of bone-crushing hits became staples of highlight shows. Players were mythologized as gladiators, their injuries framed as badges of honor. Shake it off became not just a phrase, but an ethos. The spectacle demanded resilience, and resilience demanded silence in the face of suffering. This culture, deeply woven into the NFL's fabric, is what makes the league both magnetic and dangerous. To survive in it requires a devotion bordering on obsession. To thrive in it requires a willingness to sacrifice almost everything. And it is that very willingness, the drive to play through pain, to give more than the body can sustain, that fuels the darkness at the heart of the sport. This documentary will not unfold as a simple narrative of tragedy. It will be a layered journey. We will explore the medical science that exposes what decades of collisions have done to the human brain. We will look at financial realities, where young men earn fortunes quickly and lose them just as fast, often left with little once the game ends. We will examine the mental health crisis among former players, tracing the link between identity, purpose, and despair. We will study the culture of competition itself, how masculinity, pride, and the mythology of toughness drive men to sacrifice themselves. And we will ask uncomfortable questions about the role of fans, media, and institutions that benefit from the spectacle while turning away from the aftermath. Throughout, we will hear the voices of players, doctors, journalists, and families who lived through it. These are not abstract statistics. They are lived realities. They are fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands whose stories reveal the humanity beneath the helmet. The NFL's success has always been measured in victories, profits, and viewership. But what happens when we measure it by its toll? When we count not just touchdowns, but surgeries, not just contracts, but funerals, not just fame, but forgotten men who once gave their bodies for the game. The answers may force us to reconsider what glory truly means. And yet, this is not a call to abandon football. The game remains beloved, and for many, it represents opportunity, community, and hope. Rather, this is a call to see it clearly, to confront the darkness alongside the light, to honor not only the triumphs, but also the sacrifices. Because only when we acknowledge both can we fully understand the NFL's place in our culture. This is the story we are about to tell. The story of competition pushed to its limits. The story of an empire built on sacrifice. The story of what happens when the pursuit of glory becomes a shadow too heavy to bear. It is time to step beyond the stadium lights. It is time to walk into the truth. The first thing you notice in the NFL is not the touchdowns or the pageantry. It is the collisions. The sound of helmet striking helmet, shoulders slamming into chest, bone reverberating against bone. It is a sound that rattles stadiums, echoing through the seats like a thunderclap. To fans, it is part of the spectacle. To players, it is everyday reality. Every snap is a confrontation with physics. Every play is a reminder that in football, the body is both weapon and casualty. The NFL's mythology has always celebrated this violence. Coaches, broadcasters, and fans talk about the trenches, the battles along the line of scrimmage, where linemen collide with a force comparable to car accidents. Over and over, dozens of times per game, an offensive guard can expect to make contact with an opponent more than 60 times in a single contest. Multiply that by a 16 or 17 game season, then multiply again across a career, and the toll becomes clear. The human body was never designed for this kind of sustained punishment, yet in football, it is demanded. Consider the case of Earl Campbell, the legendary Houston Oilers running back of the late 1970s and early 80s. Campbell embodied the very idea of power football. His runs were collisions disguised as carries, his body a battering ram that wore down defenses and inspired awe in fans. He won an MVP award, rushed for over 9,000 yards, and became a Hall of Famer. But the price of his greatness was brutal. By his 50s, Campbell struggled to walk. His knees deteriorated beyond repair. In interviews, he admitted that daily tasks climbing stairs, standing for long periods, had become monumental challenges. He was once a symbol of unstoppable force. Now, he lived with the consequences of that force. Campbell is not alone. Terrell Davis, the Denver Broncos star who helped deliver 2 Super Bowl championships in the late 1990s, retired at just 29 years old. His knees, shredded by repeated injuries, could not sustain the load. Bo Jackson, perhaps the most gifted natural athlete in American history, saw his NFL career cut short by a devastating hip injury. Stories like these remind us that in football, the body is never permanent. It is a temporary vessel for glory, borrowed and often broken. The science of injury tells us even more. According to data collected by the NFL Players Association, the most common injuries in the league involve knees, ankles, and shoulders. Torn ACLs, dislocated shoulders, ruptured Achilles tendons. These are the currency of the game. Medical studies show that retired players are far more likely than the general population to suffer from arthritis, joint replacement surgeries, and chronic pain. The physical price is not only immediate, but lifelong. And yet, within the culture of the NFL, pain has rarely been treated as a reason to stop. Instead, it has been treated as proof of toughness. For decades, Team doctors and trainers administered injections of cortisone and painkillers to keep players on the field. The phrase "playing hurt" became a badge of honor. Consider Charles Woodson, the legendary defensive back who once played an entire Super Bowl with a broken collarbone. Or Ronnie Lott, the Hall of Fame safety who, in 1985, famously chose to have part of his finger amputated, rather than sit out games. These stories are celebrated, repeated in highlight packages, passed down as evidence of football's warrior spirit. But beneath the admiration lies a darker truth. The culture of sacrifice conditions players to accept suffering as normal, even desirable. For many players, this conditioning begins long before they ever reach the NFL. In high school and college, athletes are told to shake it off, to push through the pain, to prove their worth by refusing to admit weakness. By the time they arrive in the professional ranks, this mindset is ingrained. It is part of the identity of football itself. The result is a league full of men who often do not recognize the long-term consequences until it is too late. The body in football is not merely a tool, it is a battlefield. And like any battlefield, it leaves scars. Take Brett Favre, one of the most celebrated quarterbacks in history. Favre was revered for his toughness, playing in 297 consecutive games, a record for quarterbacks that may never be broken. But in retirement, Favre has admitted to suffering memory lapses, persistent pain, and lingering effects from injuries sustained over 2 decades. His durability made him a legend. It also left him vulnerable to a lifetime of damage. The toll extends beyond bones and joints. Every hit absorbed by the body reverberates through the brain. While concussions and CTE often dominate discussions, the accumulation of subconcussive hits, the blows that don't result in immediate symptoms, are equally devastating. Researchers at Boston University have shown that linemen who may never be diagnosed with a concussion during their careers still suffer thousands of head impacts that cumulatively alter brain function. In essence, the very act of playing the position is a form of injury, repeated week after week, year after year. And yet, the pursuit of glory persists. Why? Because for many players, the alternative feels unthinkable. Football offers opportunities few other avenues can provide: wealth, recognition, community, and a sense of belonging. For young men from difficult circumstances, the game represents a lifeline. Sacrificing the body feels worth it in the moment, especially when the rewards are immediate and the risks feel distant. But once the cheering stops, reality sets in. Many retired players describe mornings where simply getting out of bed is a struggle. Others speak of the frustration of knowing that their athletic peak came at the expense of their physical longevity. For some, the anger and despair that follow are as damaging as the injuries themselves. This tension between the pursuit of glory and the certainty of damage is central to the NFL's darkness. The body becomes both the means of success and the casualty of success. Players learn to accept pain as part of the deal, only to discover later that the deal was far more costly than they imagined. The NFL has attempted reforms. Rules to protect quarterbacks, penalties for helmet-to-helmet hits. Advances in medical care have been implemented in recent years, and yet the essence of the game remains unchanged. Football is violence. It cannot exist without collisions, without bodies crashing into each other with reckless abandon. It is the violence that makes it compelling, and it is the violence that makes it destructive. As we move deeper into this story, we will examine not only the physical toll, but the cultural forces that demand it. Because the question is not only why players endure, but why society demands that they do. Why we cheer louder for the hardest hits. Why we celebrate when players return from injuries sooner than expected. Why we equate toughness with silence in the face of suffering. The body as battlefield is not just a player as burden, it is also a reflection of what we ask from the game itself. And so, we begin here with the body. Because it is the first and most visible casualty of football's competitive darkness. But it is only the beginning. Beyond the bones and joints lie deeper costs of mind, of identity, of spirit that reveal just how heavy the pursuit of glory truly becomes. If the body is the first battlefield of football, the mind is the second and often the most devastating. Bones can be mended, ligaments repaired, joints replaced with metal and plastic. But the injuries that linger in the brain are harder to see, harder to diagnose, and infinitely harder to repair. They are the silent injuries, the hidden tolls, the shadows that follow long after the final whistle. The conversation around mental health in the NFL has shifted dramatically in the past 2 decades, but the roots of that shift lie in tragedy. When Hall of Fame center Mike Webster's autopsy revealed chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, the world began to understand what repeated head trauma does to the human brain. Webster had spent his post-retirement years living in cars, suffering from severe memory loss, depression, and erratic behavior. His decline was not a mystery, it was a medical reality that the NFL could no longer ignore. Since then, countless stories have surfaced, each one echoing the same haunting theme. Football changes the mind. Junior Seau was a linebacker whose ferocity and leadership made him one of the most respected players of his era. He was the embodiment of toughness, the kind of player who seemed indestructible. But in 2012, 3 years after retiring, he died by suicide at the age of 43. He shot himself in the chest, leaving his brain intact for researchers to study. They found severe CTE. His death became a turning point in public awareness, a chilling reminder that the cost of football is not just physical, but psychological, and Seau was not alone. Dave Durson, a safety for the Chicago Bears in the 1980s, followed a tragically similar path. In 2011, he too took his own life, also by shooting himself in the chest. In a note, he asked that his brain be studied for CTE. Researchers confirmed the diagnosis. His final act was both a plea for understanding and a condemnation of the system that had failed to protect him. The pattern is undeniable. CTE has been found in hundreds of former NFL players, from household names to those who barely made it past training camp. Symptoms range from memory loss and confusion to aggression, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Families often describe a transformation. A man once full of life and focus becomes withdrawn, irritable, or unpredictable. Spouses and children are left to navigate the fallout, bearing witness to the slow unraveling of someone they love. But CTE is only part of the mental health crisis. The culture of football itself shapes how players experience and respond to psychological challenges. From an early age, athletes are taught that toughness means suppressing vulnerability. Pain, whether physical or emotional, is something to be hidden, overcome, or ignored. Admitting to depression, anxiety, or fear is often seen as weakness. A violation of the unwritten code of masculinity that dominates the sport. This stigma silences players. Even as awareness of mental health has grown, the pressure to appear unbreakable remains powerful. Brandon Marshall, a wide receiver who played 13 NFL seasons, has spoken openly about his struggles with borderline personality disorder. For years, he battled mood swings, depression, and rage. Seeking help felt impossible in a culture where toughness was everything. Only later in his career, after being diagnosed and treated, did he begin advocating for mental health awareness in the league. His courage in speaking out reflects a cultural shift, but one that is still incomplete. For many players, the crisis deepens in retirement. The game that once defined their lives suddenly vanishes. The structure of practice, the adrenaline of competition, the identity of being an NFL player all disappear overnight. What remains is often uncertainty, isolation, and despair. Studies show that retired NFL players are at elevated risk for depression and substance abuse. Without the game, many struggle to redefine themselves, especially when injuries limit their ability to pursue new careers or enjoy life outside of football. The financial realities amplify the strain. While top stars earn millions, the average player does not. With short careers and high rates of post-retirement bankruptcy, money often vanishes quickly. Combine financial instability with chronic pain and mental health challenges, and the result is a recipe for crisis. Families carry much of the weight. Wives and children often serve as caregivers, managing the mood swings, confusion, or aggression that come with brain injuries. Many describe feeling helpless, watching loved ones slip away before their eyes. The silence surrounding mental health in football not only isolates players, but also isolates the people closest to them. The NFL has taken steps to address these issues. The league has partnered with mental health organizations, created programs for counseling, and pledged to reduce the stigma around seeking help. Teams now have mental health professionals on staff, yet progress remains uneven. Players continue to report reluctance to seek treatment, fearing it may affect their standing with coaches or front offices. The culture of silence is difficult to dismantle, especially in a league that still glorifies toughness above all else. At its core, the mental health crisis in football reveals a contradiction. The very qualities that make players great, their resilience. Their willingness to sacrifice, their ability to push through pain also make them vulnerable when the game ends. The mindset of suppressing weakness, so essential on the field, becomes destructive off it. The game that once gave them purpose leaves them unequipped to cope with the aftermath. This is the hidden toll of football's competitive darkness. It is not visible in highlight reels or box scores. It is not celebrated in victory parades. But it is real, and it is devastating. The question we must ask is not only how many players have been lost to brain injuries, depression, or despair, but how many more are still living in silence? How many are suffering behind closed doors, unwilling or unable to seek help? How many are still trapped in a culture that tells them to endure rather than heal? Football has given us moments of beauty and triumph, but it has also taken lives in ways that are quieter, slower, and more insidious. To confront this truth is not to abandon the game, but to understand it fully. To acknowledge that the pursuit of glory carries with it a price that cannot be ignored. The body can be broken. The mind can be shattered. And in football, too often, both are. As we move forward, we will examine not only the individual toll, but the systemic forces that perpetuate it. Because the darkness of football is not simply about personal suffering, it is about institutions, profits, and a culture that thrives on sacrifice. To understand that, we must follow the money. If mental and physical injuries are the visible cracks in the foundation of football, then money is the cement poured over them, covering, reinforcing, and ensuring the game goes on no matter the cost. The NFL is not merely a sports league. It is a business empire, an entertainment giant, and a cultural institution that thrives on spectacle. Every hit, every touchdown, every Super Bowl commercial is part of a financial ecosystem that generates billions. And within that system, players are both its engine and its expendable parts. The numbers are staggering. The NFL's annual revenue has soared past $20 billion, making it the richest sports league in the world. Television contracts alone account for billions, with networks competing fiercely for broadcasting rights. The 2021 media rights deal, for example, was worth more than $110 billion over 11 years. That is more than the GDP of some small countries, secured not by corporations or commodities, but by human bodies colliding at full speed. Sundays in America are not just about football. They are about advertising. The Super Bowl, with its commercials costing more than $7 million for a 30-second slot, illustrates how deeply corporate sponsorship is woven into the game. Beer companies, fast food chains, insurance giants all attach themselves to football's cultural power, knowing that the NFL delivers a captive audience of tens of millions. Fans see touchdowns, but advertisers see consumer loyalty. At the heart of this money machine are the players. They generate the spectacle that feeds the league's revenue, yet their share of the wealth remains limited. While top-tier stars like Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers secure contracts worth hundreds of millions, the average player makes far less. The disparity between the league's earnings and the financial security of its workforce is stark. Yes, some players rise to superstardom and secure generational wealth. But the vast majority leave the game with modest savings, often overshadowed by medical bills and lingering injuries. For every Tom Brady, there are dozens of linemen, special teams players, and practice squad members whose names fans barely remember yet, whose bodies endured the same punishment. The financial stakes also explain the league's historical reluctance to confront issues like concussions or player safety. For decades, acknowledging the full extent of head trauma would have threatened the product. If fans questioned whether the game was destroying its athletes, if parents refused to let their children play, the pipeline of talent and, thus the flow of money, would be jeopardized. This is why, for years, the NFL denied links between football and brain damage, even as evidence mounted. Protecting the brand took precedence over protecting the players. This tension between profit and player welfare extends to labor disputes. The NFL Players Association, the union representing athletes, has fought bitterly for better benefits, guaranteed contracts, and post-career medical support. Owners, meanwhile, guard their profits and resist concessions. The 2011 lockout, for example, revealed the imbalance of power. Billionaire owners could afford to wait out negotiations, while many players without stable income or savings struggled to endure months without paychecks. When the new collective bargaining agreement was signed, players gained modest improvements. But owners walked away with a bigger share of television revenue. The economics of sacrifice are perhaps most visible in the treatment of retired players. For years, pensions and disability benefits lagged far behind the realities of post-football life. Many former athletes crippled by injuries, surgeries, and chronic pain struggled to secure health care or financial assistance. Lawsuits eventually forced the NFL to establish a $1 billion concussion settlement fund, meant to compensate players suffering from neurological diseases. Yet even this has been riddled with controversy, with players alleging racial bias in how claims were evaluated. The very system designed to offer justice became another arena where profit motives overshadowed human need. The obsession with money also shapes the culture of the game itself. Consider the NFL draft. Every spring, young athletes are evaluated, measured, and tested like commodities at an auction. Their 40-yard dash times, vertical jumps, and Wonderlic scores are broadcast on national television. Analysts debate their worth as if discussing stock prices. These young men are celebrated for their potential, but also dehumanized, valued not for who they are, but for what they can provide on the field. Once they enter the league, the business model ensures constant pressure to perform. Contracts are rarely guaranteed in full, meaning a player can be cut at any time, often with little financial cushion. One injury can derail not only a career, but an entire livelihood. This precariousness keeps athletes silent about pain, fearful of losing their place on the roster. It is why so many play through concussions, torn ligaments, or broken bones. Admitting weakness risks not just playing time, but financial survival. The spectacle of football also thrives on the mythology of next man up. If a player falls, another is waiting to take his place. Teams rarely pause to mourn or reflect. The game continues and the business rolls forward. This disposability reinforces the notion that players are assets rather than people, valuable when producing, expendable when broken. Even fans participate in this economic cycle. Fantasy football, sports betting, and merchandise sales turn players into numbers on a screen or names on a jersey. A running back's injury is not just a medical event. It is a lost fantasy point, a missed betting spread, a shift in jersey demand. The humanity of athletes becomes secondary to their role in the entertainment economy. Yet for all its flaws, the system persists because the rewards, both financial and cultural, are immense. Owners grow wealthier, networks profit from ratings, and fans revel in the drama. Even players, despite the risks, often view the opportunity as worth it. For many, football is not only a chance to earn money, but a path to fame, legacy, and personal fulfillment. The game's allure is powerful enough to overshadow its dangers. But this does not erase the moral question. At what cost? How much suffering is acceptable in exchange for billions in revenue and hours of Sunday entertainment? Can a system built on physical sacrifice and financial exploitation truly be reformed? Or is exploitation embedded in its DNA? The economics of football are not just about money, they are about power. Owners, networks, and advertisers hold the most leverage, while players bear the greatest risk. Until that balance shifts, the cycle of sacrifice will continue. This financial framework also connects to broader American values. Football mirrors a culture that glorifies competition, rewards resilience, and accepts inequality as the price of ambition. The league's wealth is celebrated as a triumph of capitalism, even as it leaves behind the very people who make it possible. In this sense, the NFL is not only a sports league, but a reflection of the society that sustains it. As we continue, we will look beyond the economics to the culture itself, the myths and narratives that make football not only profitable, but sacred. Because the true cost of glory is not just counted in dollars or injuries. It is embedded in the stories we tell about toughness, masculinity, and American identity. To understand football's darkness, we must confront its mythology. Football in America is not simply a sport. It is a cultural myth, an institution woven into the national identity with threads of war, faith, and spectacle. To understand why the NFL has endured despite scandal, injury, and criticism, one must understand the mythology that sustains it. This mythology is not just about wins and losses. It is about what football is supposed to represent: the essence of toughness, the proof of masculinity, the performance of patriotism, and the promise of glory. From the moment a child picks up a football in a backyard game, the narrative begins. Coaches, parents, and communities repeat familiar refrains. Football builds character. Football teaches discipline. Football makes boys into men. The game becomes more than recreation. It becomes a rite of passage. High school stadium lights on Friday nights are described as sacred. College football Saturdays are spoken of with reverence. And Sundays, when the NFL takes the stage, feel like a national ritual. The mythology rests on the idea of sacrifice. Every player is taught early that pain is a teacher, not an enemy. To play through injury is celebrated as noble, while admitting weakness is seen as failure. This belief system is so ingrained that athletes often feel compelled to push beyond the limits of their bodies. Driven not only by ambition, but by fear of being labeled soft. A player who sits out is a quitter. A player who fights through agony is a hero. This myth of toughness is reinforced in locker rooms across the country. Stories of legends playing through unimaginable pain are passed down like scripture. Ronnie Lott famously amputated part of his finger to keep playing. Jack Youngblood played the Super Bowl with a broken leg. Brett Favre started 297 consecutive games despite countless injuries. These moments become folklore, told not with horror, but with awe, as if to suggest that greatness requires superhuman endurance. The culture extends beyond the field. Fans and commentators alike feed into the narrative. Analysts praise warriors and gladiators, framing the game as a modern battlefield. Military metaphors are everywhere. Blitzes, trenches, bombs, aerial assaults. Players are soldiers, coaches are generals, and every Sunday is another campaign in a long season of war. The Super Bowl, complete with flyovers and national anthems, blurs the line between sport and patriotism. In the mythology of football, toughness is not only athletic, it is nationalistic, a symbol of American strength. But beneath the glory lies a darker consequence. When toughness is idolized above all else, vulnerability becomes unacceptable. This culture discourages players from speaking about mental health, depression, or fear. It silences those who struggle after the cheers fade. The mythology that glorifies sacrifice is also the mythology that abandons those who can no longer endure it. The NFL has actively cultivated this mythology for decades. Its marketing campaigns highlight grit and resilience. NFL films romanticize slow-motion collisions set to orchestral music, transforming violent hits into epic poetry. Narrators spoke of players as warriors, of games as battles for honor. These images imprinted themselves on generations of fans, creating a lens through which football was not merely watched, but worshipped. Even scandals are often reframed through this mythological lens. When concussions became a national story, the league's narrative shifted not toward accountability, but toward resilience. Rule changes were promoted as ways to preserve the game's toughness while protecting players. Safety was marketed as a modern necessity, but never in a way that threatened football's identity as a brutal test of will. The mythology also relies heavily on the idea of redemption. Players who fall from grace weather through injury, personal scandal, or poor performance are often framed as characters in a redemption arc. The league thrives on comeback stories, tales of men who overcome impossible odds to reclaim their place. This reinforces the belief that football is not just a game, but a moral proving ground, where perseverance is rewarded and weakness can be overcome through sheer willpower. Yet these myths serve more than storytelling. They justify the very structures that harm players. When toughness is exalted, owners and coaches can demand more from athletes without guilt. When fans believe football builds character, they accept the injuries and sacrifices as necessary. When patriotism is woven into the game, questioning its safety or ethics feels un-American. The mythology sustains the machine, ensuring that even its darkest truths are overshadowed by its brightest symbols. Consider the halftime ceremonies where veterans are honored on the field. For years, the Department of Defense paid the NFL millions for these patriotic displays. A revelation that shocked fans who believed the gestures were purely heartfelt. In reality, these spectacles were transactions marketing campaigns designed to recruit through football's powerful cultural platform. Yet even after the truth emerged, the ceremonies continued, their symbolism too entrenched in the mythology to be abandoned. The mythology also manifests in the way communities rally around football. Small towns in Texas build multi-million-dollar stadiums for high school teams. College programs are treated with reverence equal to religion. NFL cities identify themselves through their franchises: Green Bay as Titletown, Pittsburgh as Steel City Football, Dallas as America's team. The game becomes more than entertainment. It becomes identity, and questioning it feels like questioning the community itself. For players, this mythology is both empowering and destructive. On one hand, it gives their work purpose, elevating them to near-mythic figures. On the other, it traps them in expectations that disregard their humanity. The very culture that celebrates them is the one that pressures them into silence when they suffer. What is perhaps most striking is how this mythology persists, even as evidence of football as dangers grows. Parents may pull their children from youth leagues, doctors may publish research on brain injuries, and journalists may expose scandals, but the stories of toughness, sacrifice, and glory endure. Fans cling to the mythology because it is not only about football. It is about who they believe they are. To let go of the myth would be to question the very values that football represents in American culture. The mythology of football is, in many ways, a mirror of the nation. It reflects a country that prizes resilience, celebrates strength, and reveres those who endure pain for the sake of greatness. It also reflects a society that often neglects the vulnerable, dismisses mental health, and glorifies spectacle at the expense of substance. Football does not just entertain America, it embodies America in both its triumphs and its contradictions. As we turn deeper into this journey, the question becomes clearer. If mythology sustains the game, what happens when reality collides with it? What happens when the stories no longer align with the truth, when the legends of toughness give way to evidence of trauma? When the heroes of the field become patients in hospitals? When the culture of silence is broken? The mythology of football has built a fortress around the NFL, but even the strongest fortresses eventually reveal their cracks. For all its pageantry, the NFL's shadow has always been long. Beyond the roar of the crowd and the glitter of Super Bowl rings lies a history of scandals, cover-ups, and systemic denial. These are not isolated missteps or accidents. They are patterns of behavior that reveal the league's instinct to protect its image at all costs. If mythology sustains football, secrecy ensures its survival. Perhaps no scandal embodies this more than the concussion crisis. For decades, the league minimized, denied, and actively discredited scientific evidence linking football to brain damage. As early as the 1990s, players were reporting memory loss, depression, and cognitive decline. Independent researchers began connecting these symptoms to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, a degenerative brain disease found in athletes exposed to repeated head trauma. Yet the NFL's official stance was stubborn resistance. In 1994, the league formed the Mild Traumatic Brain Injury Committee, ostensibly to study concussions. In practice, the committee downplayed risks and published papers suggesting that concussions posed no long-term danger. Independent scientists, including Dr. Bennett Omaluhu's work, later inspired the film. Concussion faced smear campaigns and efforts to discredit their research. The NFL, with its billions in revenue and cultural clout, leveraged its influence to cast doubt on truths that threatened the product. Players continued to suffer. Mike Webster, the Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, died at 50 after years of mental and physical decline. Junior, so one of the league's most beloved linebackers, took his own life in 2012. Autopsies revealed severe brain damage. Their tragedies became symbols of a reality the league had long tried to obscure. Eventually, lawsuits from thousands of former players forced the NFL to establish a settlement fund. But even then, the process was fraught with delays, denials, and accusations of bias. The concussion crisis is not just about science. It is about trust. Fans were told the game was safe. Players were assured their pain was temporary. Families were led to believe that sacrifice was noble. The cover-up shattered those illusions, exposing a league willing to mislead in order to preserve its mythology and its revenue streams. Scandals have not been confined to player health. The league has also faced repeated controversies over performance-enhancing drugs. From the steroid era of the 1980s, two more recent suspensions for substances ranging from human growth hormone to Adderall. The NFL has struggled to maintain integrity. While players bear the brunt of suspensions and fines, the system itself incentivizes pushing boundaries. The culture of toughness and performance makes chemical shortcuts almost inevitable. The league's testing policies, often criticized as inconsistent, reveal once more a balancing act between appearing vigilant and protecting stars whose absence could harm ratings. Then there are the scandals that touch on ethics and morality beyond the field. The 2014 case of Ray Rice, caught on video striking his in an elevator, ignited a national outcry. Initially, the NFL suspended him for just 2 games. Only after the video became public, forcing fans, sponsors, and politicians to confront the brutality did the league act more forcefully. The episode exposed a culture of reactive, image-driven discipline. Domestic violence was not new in football, but the league's handling of Rice crystallized a perception. The NFL cared more about optics than justice. Similar patterns emerged in other controversies, from the mishandling of sexual assault allegations to inconsistent enforcement of personal conduct policies. Critics argued that star players received leniency, while lesser-known athletes faced harsher punishment. The appearance of selective justice reinforced the idea that the league's true priority was protecting its most marketable assets. Even the sanctity of the game itself has not been immune. Spygate, the 2007 scandal in which the New England Patriots were caught videotaping opponents' signals, and Deflategate, the 2015 controversy over underinflated footballs, revealed how far teams might go to gain an edge. While debates raged over the severity of these infractions, the common thread was clear. The pursuit of victory often eclipsed the pursuit of fairness. And the league's response, sometimes heavy-handed, sometimes opaque, often fueled more cynicism than confidence. The NFL's financial practices have also drawn scrutiny. For years, the league enjoyed non-profit tax status, despite generating billions. Owners benefited from lucrative stadium deals, subsidized by public funds, while communities bore the cost. Scandals involving franchise relocations teams leaving loyal. Fan bases for more profitable markets underscored the ruthless economics beneath the loyalty narrative. Cities like St. Louis, once proud football towns, were left with empty stadiums and broken promises. In each of these scandals, the common denominator is control of narrative. The NFL understands that its power lies not only in the product on the field, but in the story told around it. Scandals threaten that story, so the league acts swiftly, not always to correct the problem, but to contain it. Press releases, carefully staged press conferences, and behind-the-scenes lobbying all serve to manage perception. The goal is not just to maintain fans' trust, but to ensure that advertisers, networks, and politicians remain aligned with the league's interests. The ability to weather scandals speaks to the resilience of football's mythology, but also to the machinery of suppression. In a different industry, the concussion crisis alone might have been catastrophic. In football, it was a storm endured, a challenge absorbed, and ultimately, a threat minimized enough to preserve the spectacle. The NFL is not invincible, but it is adept at survival, yet cracks remain. Each scandal chips away at the foundation of trust. Each cover-up raises questions about accountability. Fans may forgive, but they do not forget. And players, more empowered than ever through social media and collective action, are less willing to stay silent. The NFL's ability to control the narrative is not what it once was. What does it mean when a league built on glory must constantly bury its own darkness? What does it say about a culture that forgives scandal as long as the product remains entertaining? And how many more secrets remain hidden, waiting for the moment when they can no longer be suppressed? The history of scandals and cover-ups reveals more than isolated incidents. It reveals a league that has repeatedly chosen protection of image over protection of people. It shows us an institution willing to obscure truth to preserve myth. And it challenges us to ask whether football's darkness is not an aberration, but a feature of the system itself. As we move forward, we must confront not just the scandals, but the human toll they conceal. Behind every headline, there are players and families bearing the weight of decisions made in boardrooms. The next chapter takes us directly into that human cost, the lives forever altered by the choices of a league that promised glory but delivered pain. Every cheer, every touchdown, every championship parade is shadowed by a quieter or more haunting reality, the human toll left behind when the game is over. The NFL celebrates its heroes on the field, but what happens after the stadium lights dim often tells the truer story of football's cost. For players, the end of a career does not mean the end of sacrifice. For families, the game's damage is lived long after the applause has faded. Consider the story of Mike Webster, the Pittsburgh Steelers Hall of Fame center, whose decline became one of the most chilling examples of football's aftermath. Known as Iron Mike, Webster anchored the Steelers' offensive line during their dynasty years of the 1970s. On the field, he was indestructibly leader, a warrior, a legend. Off the field, his post-football life unraveled. He suffered memory loss, depression, and erratic behavior. At times, he lived in his car, using a taser to induce sleep. When he died at 50, his autopsy revealed severe brain damage on early. Undeniable sign of CTE, Webster's story is not unique. It is echoed in countless former players whose names are less familiar, but whose struggles are just as profound. Depression, addiction, financial instability, and family breakdown are recurring themes in the lives of retired athletes. The adrenaline of the game is replaced with silence. the structure of team life dissolves, leaving isolation. For many, the absence of football is not just the loss of a career, it's the loss of identity. Families often bear the brunt of this decline. Wives, children, and parents watch as the men they once knew transform under the weight of chronic pain and mental illness. Some become caretakers, managing mood swings, memory lapses, and physical disabilities. Others become victims of the emotional volatility that untreated brain injuries can unleash. The violence celebrated on the field sometimes finds its way into homes, fueled by trauma that was never acknowledged, much less treated. The statistics are sobering. Studies show that former NFL players are significantly more likely to suffer from neurodegenerative diseases than the general population. Rates of depression and substance abuse are markedly higher. Financial difficulties compound these struggles as medical costs mount while income dwindles. Even with the league's concussion settlement fund, many families have struggled to secure adequate support. The bureaucracy of claims, coupled with the limited scope of payouts, leaves countless players without the help they need. And yet, despite all of this, the stories of resilience persist. Some families rally together, advocating for awareness and reform. The widows of players lost to CTE have become powerful voices, pushing for change in how the game addresses brain injuries. Their testimony has kept the issue in the public eye, ensuring that the sacrifices of their loved ones are not forgotten. The mental health crisis among former players is perhaps the most under-discussed dimension of football's cost. The culture of toughness discourages vulnerability, making it difficult for athletes to seek help. Depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation are common, but admitting to them feels like breaking the code of masculinity instilled since childhood. The tragic deaths of players like Junior Seau and Dave Durson, both of whom suffered from CTE and took their own lives, exposed how devastating this silence can be. Families again are left to pick up the pieces. Seau's children spoke of the confusion and pain of watching their father struggle before his death. Durson, in a chilling final note, asked that his brain be studied, ensuring that his death would contribute to understanding the disease. Their sacrifices underscore the deep human cost that football extracts not only from the men who play, but from everyone who loves them. Beyond the neurological damage, the physical toll of football is lifelong. Retired players often live with chronic pain from broken bones, torn ligaments, and surgeries. Many rely on opioids or other medications to manage daily life, leading to cycles of dependency and addiction. The league's culture of prescribing painkillers to keep athletes on the field has been criticized as a contributor to these problems, with lawsuits revealing how widespread and casual the practice once was. For families, these struggles extend into financial insecurity. While a few players retire with millions, most do not. Short careers, poor financial management, and lack of post-career planning leave many without stable income. Some are forced to sell memorabilia, declare bankruptcy, or take jobs far removed from the glory of the NFL. The fall from stadium lights to financial hardship is not only dramatic, but humiliating, compounding the psychological strain. This cycle raises profound questions about responsibility. What does the league owe its players after their careers end? Should the NFL provide lifetime health care, given the lifelong injuries? Should pensions be stronger, settlements broader, and resources more accessible? These debates continue, but the lived reality for many families is clear. The support is not enough. The human toll also extends to children who grow up in the shadow of football. Some see their fathers celebrated as legends, only to watch them deteriorate before their eyes. Others struggle with the absence created by travel, training, or post-career decline. For many, football becomes not only the source of their family's pride, but also its greatest source of pain. Still, amid this darkness, there are stories of healing. Some players, with the support of family and community, find new purpose in retirement. They coach, mentor, or advocate for reform. They turn their pain into platforms for awareness, ensuring that future generations are better protected. These stories matter because they prove that while football extracts a terrible cost, resilience and advocacy can forge meaning from tragedy. The legacy of the human toll is twofold. On one side, it is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the game's glory is inseparable from its sacrifices. On the other, it is a call to action, a demand that the league, the fans, and the culture acknowledge the humanity of players beyond their on-field performance. When we talk about the cost of football, it is easy to measure in dollars, ratings, or championships. But the truest measure is in lives altered, families fractured, and futures rewritten. The game does not end when the whistle blows. For many, the battle continues in living rooms, hospitals, and cemeteries. This is the truth behind the myth. The NFL is more than entertainment. It's a machine that shapes and sometimes destroys lives. Its victories are shadowed by its casualties, and its heroes often become its victims. The human toll is not a side effect of football. It is part of its DNA. As we turn the page to the next chapter, we leave behind the families and players whose stories define football's hidden cost. And we move toward another layer of darkness, the racial dynamics and systemic inequities that run beneath the surface of the game. For football's myth of unity and brotherhood often conceals divides that are far harder to heal. When the NFL takes the field on Sunday afternoons, it presents itself as a portrait of unity. Players of different backgrounds stand shoulder to shoulder, teammates in pursuit of victory. But beneath the spectacle lies a reality that is both undeniable and uncomfortable. Systemic inequalities, particularly along racial lines, have shaped the league from its earliest days to the present. The NFL is not just a business or a sport tick, it is a reflection of American society, with all of its triumphs and its deep, unresolved tensions. From the beginning, race dictated opportunity. The NFL's origins in the 1920s coincided with an era of segregation in America. Black players like Fritz Pollard, one of the league's first stars and later its first black head coach, were trailblazers in a world stacked against them. Pollard led teams with courage and brilliance. But by 1934, the league quietly enforced an informal color line, excluding black players entirely until after World War II. The reintroduction of black athletes into the league in 1946 was not a product of goodwill, but of pressure mirroring the broader integration struggles of American life. By the 1960s and 70s, black athletes became the backbone of the NFL's labor force. They dominated on the field, especially in positions demanding speed, strength, and endurance. Yet barriers remained in the places where power was concentrated. Quarterback, the most visible and intellectually celebrated position, was long considered off-limits for black players. Stereotypes perpetuated the myth that black athletes were not suited for the leadership and decision-making responsibilities of the position. Even as black athletes excelled elsewhere, the quarterback position became a mirror of racial bias in football. Warren Moon's career is one of the starkest examples of this prejudice. Despite a stellar college career at the University of Washington, Moon went undrafted by the NFL in 1978. His crime: being a black quarterback. Moon was forced to play in the Canadian Football League, where he became a superstar, winning 5 Grey Cups before the NFL finally acknowledged his talent. When he joined the Houston Oilers in 1984, he went on to have a Hall of Fame career, silencing every critic who doubted his ability to lead an offense. Yet his story also highlighted the deep structural barriers that kept many talented black quarterbacks from ever getting a chance. Even today, echoes of those biases persist. Black quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes have shattered stereotypes. But their success does not erase the generations of exclusion before them, and the double standards remain visible. Black quarterbacks often face harsher scrutiny for mistakes, while their athleticism is sometimes praised at the expense of their intellect. Their style of play is described differently, coded in language that diminishes their command of the game. The disparities extend beyond the playing field. Roughly 70% of NFL players are black, yet ownership remains overwhelmingly white. In fact, no majority black owner exists in the league. Front offices and coaching staffs reflect the same imbalance. Despite decades of players of color fueling the NFL's success, the path to power-where decisions about franchises, hiring, and money remains largely closed. The Rooney Rule, introduced in 2003, was supposed to address this imbalance by requiring teams to interview minority candidates for head coaching positions. While the rule initially seemed progressive, in practice, it became a checkbox exercise. Many teams conducted perfunctory interviews with no genuine intent to hire. In 2022, Brian Flores, former head coach of the Miami Dolphins, filed a lawsuit against the NFL, alleging discriminatory hiring practices. Flores claimed he had been subjected to sham interviews and retaliated against for refusing unethical directives. His lawsuit was a bombshell, exposing what many already knew. Systemic racism was not a thing of the past, it was ongoing. The issue is not only about hiring, but about representation at the highest levels of leadership. The league office, ownership, and executive roles are where real power resides. Decisions about labor, player discipline, and league policies reflect the values of those in charge. Time and again, the contrast is glaring. A workforce that is majority black, governed by a leadership class that is overwhelmingly white. Disciplinary policies further underscore racial inequities. Studies have shown that black players receive harsher punishments for similar infractions compared to white players. The contrast between how the league handled issues involving players of color versus those involving white players has fueled accusations of bias. Moreover, during the concussion settlement process, the NFL used race norming, a practice that assumed black players had lower baseline cognitive function, making it harder for them to qualify for payouts. This policy, only abandoned after public outrage and lawsuits, revealed how systemic racism could manifest even in medical assessments tied to justice and compensation. Beyond structures and policies, the league has also faced cultural reckonings. Colin Kaepernick's decision to kneel during the national anthem in 2016 sparked one of the most divisive debates in modern sports history. Kaepernick, joined by a handful of players, protested police brutality and racial injustice. His silent, peaceful act reverberated across the nation, drawing both praise and condemnation. But the NFL's response was telling. Kaepernick was effectively blackballed, unable to find a roster spot even as lesser quarterbacks were signed. His career was sacrificed to preserve the league's image, sending a chilling message about whose voices were welcome and whose were not. The contradiction was glaring. The NFL leaned heavily on the labor of black athletes, celebrated their physicality, and used their likenesses to fuel billion-dollar broadcasts. Yet, when one of those athletes spoke out against injustice, the league turned its back. Only years later, under immense social pressure following George Floyd's murder in 2020, did the NFL issue statements of support for racial justice. Even then, critics questioned whether those gestures were genuine reform or public relations maneuvers. The dynamic of exploitation runs deeper than symbolism. For decades, the NFL marketed violence, toughness, and spectacle qualities often embodied by black athletes while profiting off their bodies without adequately protecting their futures. The inequity is not just about representation, but about extraction, taking talent, risking health, and discarding players when they are no longer profitable. The fans, too, are part of this equation. The perception of black athletes has often been shaped by stereotypes that reinforce racial hierarchies. Quarterbacks are field generals. Running backs are workhorses. Defensive players are beasts. The language dehumanizes while coding leadership, intelligence, and strategy as traits more often associated with white players. These subtle but persistent narratives shape public opinion and reinforce systemic barriers. Still, resistance has always existed. From Fritz Pollard's pioneering role in the 1920s to Kaepernick's protest in the 2010s, black athletes have pushed back against the structures that limited them. Their courage has forced the NFL, however reluctantly, to evolve. the rise of successful black quarterbacks, the increased visibility of minority coaches, and the growing spotlight on systemic inequities reflect progress. But progress does not erase history. The question for the NFL is whether it can move beyond token measures and truly confront its inequalities. Can ownership diversify? Can leadership reflect the diversity of its workforce? Can the league acknowledge the ways it has profited from racial exploitation and work towards systemic change? These questions linger, and the answers remain uncertain. What is clear is that the NFL cannot separate itself from the broader context of America. The league's racial dynamics mirror those of the nation. Progress punctuated by resistance, breakthroughs shadowed by backlash, and victories often won through sacrifice. Football, in many ways, is America's game not just because it entertains millions, but because it encapsulates the country's contradictions. As we step forward into the next chapter of this story, we move from racial dynamics to another layer of football-esque competitive darkness. The league's relationship with power, politics, and money. For the NFL's inequalities are not confined to race alone. They are woven into a system where influence and profit often take precedence over justice and humanity. The NFL is more than a game. It is a cultural institution, a billion-dollar machine, and a political force. Every Sunday, millions tune in for the drama on the field. But beyond the touchdowns and highlight reels lies another story, one that reveals how power, politics, and profit have shaped the league's identity. To understand the NFL's competitive darkness, we must peel back the layers of its influence, its entanglements with government, its corporate partnerships, and its role in shaping narratives that extend far beyond the gridiron. The relationship between the NFL and politics has never been incidental. From the Cold War to the present day, football has been a stage for American identity. During World War II, the NFL aligned itself with patriotic themes, presenting the sport as a reflection of national strength. In the decades that followed, games were framed as a kind of cultural battleground, proof that American toughness and resolve were unmatched. Football became more than entertainment. It was a symbolic assertion of power. Nowhere was this more visible than after September 11, 2001. The attacks shook the nation, and the NFL quickly positioned itself as a platform of unity. American flags were unfurled across fields. Players donned patriotic decals, and military flyovers became staples of pre-game ceremonies. Yet behind the spectacle, another story unfolded. The Department of Defense and the NFL entered into contracts worth millions, effectively paying teams to host military tributes. What fans believed were organic gestures of respect were, in many cases, marketing campaigns funded by taxpayer dollars. This revelation sparked outrage when it came to light in 2015, exposing the league's ability to blend patriotism with profit. The ties between football and government go deeper still. The league has long enjoyed unique legal protections, including antitrust exemptions that allow it to operate with a monopoly-like grip. In exchange, the NFL has cultivated relationships with politicians who see the league as a tool for soft power, civic pride, and even economic development. Stadiums, those gleaming temples of modern sports, stand as monuments to this partnership. Across the country, cities have poured billions in public funds into NFL stadium projects, often at the expense of local taxpayers. Owners present these projects as engines of growth, promising jobs and revitalization. Yet study after study shows the economic impact is often negligible, while the financial burden falls squarely on the public. The NFL's influence over local governments has been nothing short of staggering. Teams have threatened to relocate unless cities met their demands for subsidies and upgrades. The saga of the St. Louis Rams is a prime example. After years of disputes over stadium funding, the team's owner, Stan Kroenke, orchestrated a move to Los Angeles, leaving behind a city that had invested millions to keep the franchise. For St. Louis fans, it was a betrayal. For the league, it was business as usual. But politics is not just about money. it is also about control of narratives. The NFL has cultivated its image carefully, working to maintain a sense of unity and wholesomeness, even when fractures appear. When players began kneeling during the national anthem, the league found itself at the intersection of politics and protest. The act was simple, yet powerful, a quiet demonstration against racial injustice. But the response was anything but quiet. Politicians seized the moment, with some condemning the protests as unpatriotic. The NFL, caught between its predominantly black workforce and its largely white ownership and fan base, wavered. It sought to quell dissent while protecting its brand. The controversy exposed the league's balancing act. It wanted the appearance of patriotism without the disruption of genuine political discourse. It wanted the spectacle of unity without confronting the fractures that unity concealed. The result was a league that looked less like a neutral stage for sports and more like a corporation wielding political influence to protect itself. Corporate power has always been intertwined with the NFL's politics. Sponsorships fuel the league's economy, and those sponsors are not passive partners. Beer companies, soft drink giants, automobile manufacturers, and tech conglomerates shape the image of the NFL as much as any player or coach. Advertising dollars dictate which stories are amplified and which are buried. The league's emphasis on family-friendly branding often means controversial issues, whether related to domestic violence, drug abuse, or player health, are managed carefully to avoid scaring off sponsors. The concussion crisis revealed just how far the league would go to protect its business interests. For years, evidence mounted that repeated head trauma caused lasting neurological damage. Players suffered memory loss, depression, and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. Yet the NFL's initial response was denial, obfuscation, and the commissioning of biased studies designed to downplay the risks. Why? Because acknowledging the truth threatened the league's bottom line. Admitting the danger of football was not just a medical issue, which was a political one. It meant liability, lawsuits, and the potential loss of billions in revenue. The battle over concussions extended into Congress, where hearings exposed the NFL's influence and its willingness to manipulate science to protect itself. In one hearing, Representative Linda compared the league's tactics to those of the tobacco industry, which for decades denied the dangers of smoking. The parallel was damning. A multi-billion-dollar enterprise choosing self-preservation over honesty. The NFL's political clout extends even to labor relations. Collective bargaining agreements between the league and the players' union are often framed as negotiations. But the power imbalance is stark. Owners hold the keys to the kingdom, and the players, despite their talent, are replaceable. Strikes and lockouts have occurred, but in the end, the league almost always emerges with terms that protect ownership's wealth. For all the talk of brotherhood and unity, the NFL remains a business where labor is expendable and profit reigns supreme. Even the Super Bowl, the crown jewel of American sports, is saturated with politics and power. Cities bid for the honor of hosting, offering tax breaks and incentives in hopes of capturing the prestige. The event becomes less about football and more about economics, tourism, and national identity. Politicians flock to the games, eager to be photographed alongside athletes and celebrities. The spectacle is presented as unifying, yet beneath it lies a stark reminder. Power and money dictate who benefits and who pays. The league's global ambitions add another dimension. Games in London and Mexico City are framed as efforts to grow the sport. But they also reveal the NFL's desire to extend its political and economic reach. The league envisions itself not just as America's pastime, but as a global empire. And like any empire, it leverages its influence to maintain dominance, often without regard for the communities left behind. As we trace the NFL's web of politics and power, a pattern emerges. The league has always been more than sport. It has been a tool of cultural projection, a vehicle for corporate profit, and a partner in political agendas. Its influence is vast, its reach unmatched, and its willingness to wield power undeniable. But with that power comes responsibility, and the NFL's record shows that responsibility is often secondary to self-interest. This is the hidden cost of glory, a league that thrives not only on competition, but on its entanglements with power structures far beyond the field. It presents itself as a sanctuary of sport, yet behind the curtain, deals are made, influence is traded, and politics shapes outcomes. As we move deeper into the NFL's competitive darkness, the next chapter takes us from politics to economics. Just the billions that flow into league coffers, but the stark reality of how players, cities, and communities bear the financial burdens while ownership reaps the rewards. The money trail, when followed closely, reveals truths as unsettling as any hit delivered on the field. The NFL's power does not exist in a vacuum. It is fueled by money-unfathomable sums that transform a sport into an empire. On the surface, football appears simple. Teams compete, fans cheer, and champions are crowned. But underneath that simplicity lies one of the most complex financial systems in professional sports. The economics of the NFL reveal both brilliance and darkness, a machine designed to maximize profit often at the expense of players, cities, and fans. Consider first the league's staggering revenues. In 2022 alone, the NFL generated more than $18 billion, making it the most profitable sports league in the world. Television contracts account for the lion's share. Networks like CBS, Fox, NBC, and ESPN, along with streaming giants like Amazon, have poured hundreds of billions into long-term deals to secure broadcast rights. In return, the NFL delivers consistent ratings dominance week after week. The Super Bowl remains the most watched event in American television, a cultural ritual that transcends sports. This system of media contracts has created a revenue-sharing model that ensures every team, regardless of market size, enjoys enormous wealth. The Green Bay Packers, based in one of the smallest markets in professional sports, report revenues comparable to franchises in New York or Los Angeles. On paper, this structure promotes competitive balance. In practice, it protects ownership wealth. Each franchise owner, regardless of how successful their team is on the field, can count on a massive guaranteed payout every season. For billionaires, the NFL is less a risky investment and more a money-printing machine. Yet this wealth is not evenly distributed. The players, whose bodies generate the spectacle, fight for their share through collective bargaining. In the 2020 agreement, players secured 48% of league revenue, a significant figure, but one that still leaves billions in the hands of ownership. For most players, who face short careers and enormous health risks, the economics feel less like partnership and more like exploitation. Rookie contracts remain tightly controlled, and non-guaranteed deals mean careers can end overnight with little financial security. Only a small percentage of players sign the massive contracts that make headlines. For the majority, the NFL is a job with high risk, limited benefits, and fleeting opportunity. The economics of stadium construction reveal another layer of this darkness. Across the country, cities have subsidized NFL stadiums with taxpayer dollars. The logic is always the same. Owners and politicians argue that a new stadium will create jobs, boost tourism, and revitalize communities. Yet independent studies repeatedly show that these promises rarely materialize. The economic benefits are overstated, while the costs are real and immediate. Taxpayers foot the bill, often through bonds that take decades to pay off, while owners reap the profits from luxury boxes, naming rights, and increased franchise values. The construction of a TNT Stadium in Arlington, Texas, home of the Dallas Cowboys, is one example. Built at a cost of $1.2 billion, more than $325 million came from public funds. In Las Vegas, Allegiant Stadium, home to the Raiders, was built with $750 million in taxpayer money. One of the largest public stadium subsidies in American history. The beneficiaries are not the communities, but the billionaire owners whose franchises skyrocket in value. Meanwhile, the average fan feels the squeeze. Ticket prices have soared, making attendance a luxury rather than a family outing. The average cost of attending an NFL game, factoring in tickets, concessions, and parking, often exceeds $600 for a family of 4. Merchandise and streaming services add to the financial burden, creating a system where fans are both the lifeblood and the exploited. The league has mastered the art of turning passion into profit, monetizing every aspect of fandom. Corporate sponsorship further fuels this machine, from beer companies to car manufacturers to sports betting firms. Brands pour billions into partnerships with the NFL. Every logo on a broadcast, every advertisement in a stadium, every official sponsor tag represents another revenue stream. In recent years, the explosion of legalized sports gambling has created a new frontier for profit. Once considered taboo, betting is now fully embraced by the league, with sportsbooks integrated into broadcast and stadium experiences. The same league that once punished players like Paul Hornung and Alex Karras for gambling now profits handsomely from the practice. Yet the economics of gambling raise troubling questions. For players, the pressure intensifies as betting markets dissect every move. For fans, the line between entertainment and financial risk blurs. And for the league, the potential for scandal weather through match fixing or insider knowledge looms in the background. Still, the profits are too large to resist. Perhaps the most striking element of NFL economics is the way the league shields its owners from risk. Teams are often family-owned dynasties, passed down across generations, growing exponentially in value. In 1977, the average NFL franchise was worth $30 million. Today, the average valuation exceeds $4 billion. Yet these fortunes are built not only on the talent of players, but also on public subsidies, favorable labor agreements, and a system designed to minimize losses, even in downturns, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic. The league and its owners found ways to maintain profitability while players bore the brunt of uncertainty. The disparity between wealth at the top and precarity at the bottom is stark. Consider the case of a journeyman player, special teams contributor who spends 3 or 4 years in the league before injuries end his career. His earnings, while higher than the national average, may not provide lifelong security, especially once medical costs for lingering injuries mount. Without guaranteed contracts, pensions, or long-term health care, many former players find themselves struggling financially within years of leaving the game. Contrast this with owners, who profit from the league regardless of performance, insulated from the physical and emotional toll. Even within the players' ranks, the wealth gap is immense. Superstars earn contracts worth hundreds of millions, while the majority fight for roster spots, living on minimum salaries that vanish once their careers end. The league markets the dream of riches and glory, but for most players, that dream remains just out of reach. The economics are structured to celebrate the few while discarding the many. The story of the NFL's economic machine is not just about numbers. It is about values. It reflects a system that prioritizes profit over people, branding over honesty, and growth over fairness. Fans are loyal, players are sacrificial, and owners are rewarded. The result is a league that thrives financially while leaving behind those who built it. The question becomes, how sustainable is this model? Can a sport built on such stark disparities continue to thrive indefinitely? Thus far, the answer has been yes. Ratings remain high, revenues continue to climb, and demand shows no sign of waning. But beneath the surface, discontent brews. Former players push for better pensions and health benefits. Communities question why they fund billionaires' stadiums. Fans grapple with rising costs. The cracks are visible, even if the foundation still holds. The NFL has mastered the art of selling glory, while obscuring cost. It markets itself as America's game, a unifying force while operating as one of the most powerful and exploitative corporations in the world. Every touchdown, every Sunday night broadcast, every Super Bowl ad is part of a system designed to generate profit at every turn. As we move forward, the story deepens. If money is the foundation of the NFL's power, then culture is the vehicle through which it sustains itself. The next chapter examines how the league has been shaped by American culture. From hero worship to toxic masculinity, from the mythology of toughness to the spectacle of violence. The NFL's cultural impact reveals truths as profound as its economic ones. The NFL has always been more than sport. It is theater, ritual, and mythology. At its core lies a cultural narrative that glorifies toughness, celebrates violence, and equates masculinity with sacrifice. From its earliest days, the league positioned football as the ultimate proving ground of manhood, battlefield where courage is tested, pain is ignored, and victory is achieved at any cost. This mythology has shaped generations of players, fans, and even the nation's identity. But it also reveals the darker truths of what happens when a culture elevates toughness above humanity. The roots of this culture can be traced to the 20th century, when football became a symbol of American grit. As the nation industrialized and urbanized, football emerged as a way to preserve ideals of rugged masculinity. College programs at institutions like Yale, Harvard, and Michigan built reputations, not only on winning games, but on cultivating toughness in young men who would become leaders. When the NFL was born in the 1920s, it inherited this ethos and amplified it. To play football was to embrace hardship. To be weak was to fail. By the 1960s and 70s, the NFL fully embodied this mythology. Coaches like Vince Lombardi of the Green Bay Packers demanded absolute discipline and resilience. Lombardi's famous mantra, "Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing," summed up the league's culture. Players pushed through injuries, endured brutal practices, and accepted punishment as proof of character. In this world, pain was not an obstacle, it was a currency of respect. The spectacle reinforced these values. NFL films, with its slow-motion highlights, booming narrators, and dramatic music, framed players as modern gladiators. Hits were celebrated, collisions glorified. The harder the impact, the louder the cheers. Fans did not just watch football, they absorbed its mythology, internalizing the idea that toughness was the essence of greatness. The league's media machine turned sacrifice into legend. For players, the consequences were real. Broken bones, concussions, torn ligaments all were expected to be endured in silence. To admit weakness was to risk losing a job. The culture of playing hurt became a badge of honor. Stories of players suiting up with broken ribs, separated shoulders, or concussed brains became folklore. Jack Youngblood, the Los Angeles Rams defensive end, famously played the 1979 playoffs with a fractured fibula. His courage was lionized, but his suffering symbolized a league that prized toughness above health. The quarterback position, too, was woven into this narrative. Heroes like Johnny Unitas, Joe Namath, and Brett Favre became cultural icons, not only for their skill, but for their resilience. Favre's consecutive starts, streaked 297 games, was celebrated as the ultimate expression of toughness. Every throw was a defiance of pain. Every hit absorbed proof of his masculinity. These narratives cemented the expectation that real men play through suffering, no matter the cost. But beneath the glory lay devastation. The culture of toughness silenced conversations about mental health, ignored long-term consequences, and created a system where players felt disposable. To speak up was to be seen as soft. To seek help was to risk ridicule. The mythology demanded stoicism, and players complied to bond as their bodies and minds deteriorated. The consequences extended beyond the locker room. Football's mythology seeped into American culture, shaping how masculinity was defined. Young boys were taught to admire toughness, to equate manhood with physical dominance and emotional restraint. High school and college programs mirrored the NFL, reinforcing the idea that football was not just a sport but a proving ground for masculinity. Injuries were minimized, pain dismissed, and vulnerability erased. The intersection of football and military culture deepened this narrative. Broadcasters described players as warriors and soldiers. Games were framed as battles, seasons as campaigns. The language of war merged with the language of sport, blurring the line between athletic competition and national identity. In this framework, toughness was not only personal, but patriotic. To be tough was to embody American values. Yet cracks in this mythology began to emerge. The concussion crisis exposed the true cost of glorifying violence. Players who had been celebrated for toughness later suffered dementia, depression, and early death. Their sacrifice, once mythologized, was revealed as exploitation. The very traits the league glorified, resilience, silence, selflessness, were the same traits that prevented players from protecting themselves. The story of Mike Webster is one of the clearest examples. A Hall of Fame center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Webster embodied the toughness of his era. A T, played through countless injuries, anchoring the offensive line of a dynasty. But after retirement, Webster's life unraveled. He suffered from memory loss, chronic pain, and severe depression. Living in poverty, he resorted to sleeping in his car. He became the first NFL player diagnosed with CTE after his death in 2002. Webster's tragedy revealed the devastating cost of a culture that glorified sacrifice without accountability. As awareness of CTE grew, so did questions about football's mythology. Was toughness truly noble, or was it a dangerous illusion? Could the NFL continue to celebrate violent collisions while knowing their consequences? The league tried to adjust its messaging, emphasizing player safety and rule changes. But the culture proved harder to shift. Fans still cheered the hardest hits, and players still felt pressure to prove their worth through pain. The mythology also intersects with gender, shaping perceptions of who belongs in football. The sport has long been a male-dominated arena, reinforcing the idea that toughness and masculinity are inseparable. Women have fought for inclusion as fans, reporters, coaches, and even players, but the culture of hypermasculinity has often resisted. The NFL's struggles with domestic violence cases further expose the darker side of its gender dynamics, raising questions about what happens when a culture that glorifies dominance spills beyond the field. At its heart, the NFL's mythology of toughness is both inspiring and destructive. It has created unforgettable moments of heroism, bonded teammates in shared sacrifice, and inspired fans with displays of resilience. But it has also demanded silence, punished vulnerability, and left countless players broken in body and spirit. The very narrative that makes football captivating is the same narrative that perpetuates its darkness. As the league evolves, the mythology endures. Young players still dream of proving themselves on the field, of being remembered as warriors who never quit. Coaches still demand sacrifice, and fans still idolize toughness. The cultural grip of football is too strong to disappear overnight, but the reckoning is ongoing. The question is whether the NFL and American society can redefine toughness in ways that value humanity as much as heroism. The culture of masculinity and violence is only one piece of the puzzle. The next chapter examines another dimension of football: competitive darkness, the personal toll on families and communities. For behind every player is a network of parents, spouses, children, and loved ones who share the sacrifices and often bear the consequences of the NFL's relentless pursuit of glory. For every man who straps on a helmet and steps into the NFL's unforgiving arena, there is a family standing in the shadows. Wives, children, parents, each of them pulled into the orbit of the league's mythology of toughness. Whether they choose it or not, the NFL's story is often told through the lens of individual sacrifice. The broken bodies, the concussions, the pain endured on the field. But the true scope of the cost cannot be understood without looking at the ripple effects on those closest to the players. Behind the roar of stadium crowds lies a quieter story of families bearing the weight of football's darkness. The first ripple is time. The NFL schedule is relentless, consuming not just Sundays, but nearly every day of a player's year. Training camp, preseason, regular season. Playoffs the cycle leaves little room for anything else. For families, it means birthdays missed, school recitals unattended, dinners eaten alone. Children grow up with fathers who are physically present for short bursts, but mentally tethered to the game. Wives and partners learn to navigate long stretches of solitude, becoming both emotional anchors and household managers while their husbands live in the singular pursuit of football. But time is only the surface. Beneath it lies the toll of pain and injury. Players come home battered, bruised, and often emotionally withdrawn. For spouses, it means becoming caregivers as much as partners. Countless wives have spoken of massaging sore muscles late into the night, managing medical appointments, or watching helplessly as their husbands struggle with memory lapses or mood swings. Children often see their fathers not as invincible heroes, but as men in constant recovery. The mythology of toughness that fuels the NFL leaves families to absorb the aftermath. The stories of those closest to players reveal a truth rarely captured in highlight reels. Consider the wives of the 1970s Pittsburgh Steelers dynasty. Those teams were immortalized as icons of grit, but their glory came at a cost. Years later, many of their players suffered from dementia, depression, and chronic pain. Their families were left to pick up the pieces. Brenda Webster, the widow of Hall of Fame center Mike Webster, described her husband's decline as devastating. Not only for him, but for their children, who watched their father transform from a pillar of strength into a man lost in confusion and suffering. The Webster family's ordeal illustrated that the cost of football was never confined to the player alone. Children bear their own share of burdens. Some grow up idolizing their father's careers, basking in the glow of fame and recognition. But others experience fear and anxiety. The sight of a parent collapsing on the field or the unpredictability of post-career mood swings can shape childhood memories in ways outsiders rarely consider. Stories abound of children tiptoeing around volatile tempers, learning to live with unpredictability or taking on roles far beyond their years. For many, the NFL's culture of silence and stoicism means the struggles at home remain hidden, unspoken, yet deeply felt. The economic ripple is equally complicated. NFL salaries are astronomical compared to most professions, but the financial security is fragile. Careers are short, often less than 3 years, and medical issues after retirement can drain resources quickly. Families accustomed to wealth and stability during a player's prime often find themselves facing financial hardship when the checks stop coming. The sudden transition from celebrity status to obscurity can destabilize entire households. For spouses and children, it means living through the boom and bust of football's financial roller coaster. Communities, too, are drawn into the orbit of sacrifice. Local towns that rally around their hometown heroes often share in the pride of seeing one of their own succeed. But they also witness the fallout when careers end. Retired players once celebrated may return home carrying physical and emotional scars. Communities that once cheered them as gladiators must reckon with the reality of broken bodies and fractured families. The glory fades, but the consequences remain. The wife's perspective offers some of the clearest insight into the hidden costs. In 2012, a group of NFL wives testified before Congress during hearings on head injuries. Their words were sobering. They spoke of sleepless nights, of husbands who forgot their children's names, of financial and emotional ruin. They described the silence imposed by the culture of toughness, how players refuse to admit pain, leaving their families to shoulder the burden in private. Their testimonies revealed a parallel narrative of the NFL, one written not on the field, but in kitchens, bedrooms, and living rooms across America. The case of Junior so underscores this ripple effect. So was beloved a fierce linebacker, a leader, a symbol of toughness. But after retirement, he struggled with depression and impulsivity. Symptoms later linked to CTE. His death by suicide in 2012 shocked the sports world. But the deeper tragedy was borne by his family. His children, who adored their father, became the faces of grief in the aftermath. Their story illustrated that the NFL's competitive darkness reaches into the lives of the innocent, leaving wounds that stretch across generations. The ripple extends even further. Families of injured players often become advocates, pushing for reforms, lawsuits, or changes in medical policy. They step into the void left by a league that has historically prioritized image over transparency. In doing so, they challenge the mythology of toughness that silences players. The voices of widows, children, and parents have been instrumental in forcing the NFL to confront the concussion crisis. Without their testimonies, much of the hidden cost might still remain in the shadows. Yet, for many families, love for the game remains complicated. Football is not only a source of pain, but of pride. Spouses and children often share in the glory, the camaraderie, the sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. The duality is inescapable. The same game that fractures families also binds them together. The NFL is both blessing and curse, delivering fame and wealth, even as it extracts health and stability. Families live in that tension, balancing admiration with grief. For communities, the ripple effect raises broader cultural questions. What does it mean to cheer for a sport that leaves so many families broken? How does a nation reconcile its passion for football with the suffering it causes? Fans rarely see the aftermath. The late-night caregiving, the financial strain, the emotional scars. They celebrate touchdowns without seeing the toll on the children who watch their fathers decline. The mythology of football as pure entertainment erases the hidden cost borne by those off the field. The ripple effect is not just a byproduct of football, it's central to its story. The NFL's mythology of toughness demands sacrifice, but that sacrifice is never confined to the player alone. It radiates outward, consuming families and communities, shaping lives in ways both visible and unseen. The true cost of glory is not measured only in injuries or statistics, but in the quiet struggles of those left behind when the stadium lights go out. This, too, is part of the NFL's competitive darkness. For every cheer, there is a silent tear. For every hero, there is a family navigating the aftermath of his sacrifice. To understand the league fully, we must see beyond the field into the living rooms where glory's shadow falls. The next chapter will turn the lens further outward, examining how this culture of sacrifice and silence is mirrored in the media's role. For decades, television networks, commentators, and highlight reels have shaped not only how we see football, but how we interpret its mythology. To explore the media's influence is to uncover another layer of how the NFL's competitive darkness is both sustained and celebrated. The NFL has never been just a sport. It is a spectacle, a cultural institution, a televised ritual that defines American Sundays. But what gives the league its staying power is not merely the players on the field, it's the stories told around them. For decades, television networks, sports writers, and broadcasters have built the mythology of the NFL brick by brick, amplifying its heroes, concealing its shadows, and shaping the way fans understand the game. Without the media, the NFL could not have grown into the billion-dollar empire it is today. Yet with that growth came complicity. The media not only celebrated glory, but also, knowingly or not, sustained the culture of silence and toughness that left players broken. The symbiosis between football and television began in earnest in the 1960s, when Commissioner Pete Rozelle forged deals that transformed the NFL into America's most-watched sport. Rozelle understood the power of narrative. He once said, "The essence of sport is drama." To him, every game was a story, every player a character, every season a grand narrative arc. Television brought that vision to life, turning Sunday afternoons into theater. Viewers weren't just watching football, they were consuming carefully packaged drama. With the rise of networks like CBS, NBC, and later ESPN, the NFL became a staple of American living rooms. But the narratives were curated. Broadcasters glorified toughness, framing it as noble sacrifice. Injuries were downplayed, head collisions shown in slow-motion replays as evidence of grit. The subtext was clear. Pain was part of the story, and enduring it was heroic. The media's framing cemented the idea that football was not only entertainment, but also a metaphor for American resilience. The role of announcers was crucial. Their voices carried authority, and their interpretations shaped public perception. When a player was concussed and staggered off the field, commentators often praised his warrior mentality if he returned. When a lineman played through a torn ligament, broadcasters framed it as courage. Rarely did viewers hear about long-term consequences. Instead, the narrative was tightly controlled. Sacrifice was admirable, and those who withstood pain embodied the sport's highest ideals. Even highlight shows contributed to the mythology. ESPN's Jacked Up segment in the early 2000s featured bone-crushing hits replayed with commentary. That celebrated violence. Week after week, viewers cheered as players were knocked unconscious, their bodies collapsing like ragdolls. The entertainment value was undeniable, but the hidden message was darker. Human suffering was recast as spectacle. By reducing devastating collisions to punchlines, the media normalized brutality and erased the seriousness of head trauma. The complicity extended beyond television. Print journalism too often emphasized heroism over vulnerability. Profiles of players lauded their perseverance through injury, but rarely investigated the systemic pressures that compelled them to play hurt. When players retired in silence, struggling with pain or memory loss, the stories seldom made front pages. The narrative had no room for decline. Fans were left with an incomplete picture, one in which the NFL's darkness was overshadowed by its carefully polished myth of glory. This mythology shaped not only fans' perceptions, but also players' behavior. Many athletes internalized the media narratives, believing they had to embody toughness at all costs. They saw how announcers praised those who returned to the field after concussions, how headlines celebrated men who played through broken bones. The expectation became part of the culture. Pain was not an obstacle, but a stage. To admit vulnerability was to break character in the story the NFL and media had constructed together. The silence around concussions is perhaps the clearest example. For decades, media coverage downplayed the severity of head injuries. When players collapsed, broadcasters often referred to it as getting your bell rung, a phrase that trivialized brain trauma. Viewers absorbed the language, and players lived by it. Only in the 2000s, with research on chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE) coming to light, did the narrative begin to shift. But for years, the media had already cemented an image of concussions as temporary inconveniences rather than lifelong threats. Consider the case of Troy Aikman, the Hall of Fame quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. During the 1994 NFC Championship game, Aikman took a brutal hit that left him with memory loss. He later admitted he couldn't remember playing in the second half. Yet, at the time, broadcasters framed his performance as courageous, a testament to his leadership. Fans saw a hero leading his team to victory. Few considered the long-term damage he might endure. The media's framing turned suffering into inspiration, reinforcing the mythology that pain was the price of greatness. When the concussion crisis finally broke into the public consciousness in the 2000s, the media's role came under scrutiny. Critics argued that decades of coverage had not only normalized violence, but actively concealed its consequences. Documentaries and investigative journalism began to challenge the narrative, exposing how networks had prioritized ratings over responsibility. Yet the shift was slow, and the old myths proved resilient. Even today, highlight reels often emphasize devastating hits, and commentators still praise players for returning after injuries. The media's complicity also extended into the business model. Networks paid billions for broadcasting rights, making them financial partners with the NFL. Their success depended on maintaining the league's image, not undermining it. Critical coverage threatened that partnership. This financial entanglement created a feedback loop. Networks needed the NFL to thrive, and the NFL needed networks to sustain its mythology. Together, they built a product that glorified violence while obscuring its human toll. Fans, too, became part of the cycle. Conditioned by decades of media narratives, they demanded toughness, cheered for violent hits, and criticized players who sat out with injuries. The media had trained audiences to equate pain with glory, and in doing so, reinforced the pressures players already felt. When Andrew Luck retired abruptly in 2019, citing years of physical and emotional exhaustion, some fans booed him off the field. Their reaction reflected decades of storytelling that had taught them players owed their bodies to the game. Yet cracks in the narrative have begun to appear. Investigative pieces in outlets like the New York Times and documentaries such as League of Denial challenged the NFL's image, forcing networks to confront uncomfortable truths. Players themselves have begun speaking out, using platforms like podcasts and social media to bypass traditional gatekeepers. The mythology remains powerful, but it is no longer unchallenged. The conversation has shifted from unquestioning glorification to a more nuanced recognition of the costs. Still, the legacy of media complicity lingers. For generations, the stories told on television shaped the way Americans understood football. They created heroes, erased suffering, and sustained a culture where silence was demanded and sacrifice expected. Even as the truth emerges, those narratives continue to echo in stadiums and living rooms. Fans still crave the spectacle, and networks still profit from it. The mythology of toughness remains central to the NFL's identity. To understand the NFL's competitive darkness, one must reckon not only with the league itself, but also with the media machine that amplified it. Broadcasters, journalists, and networks played a role in shaping how players, fans, and communities understood pain. They turned collisions into entertainment, silence into expectation, and suffering into legend. Without them, the NFL might still be a sport, but it would not be the cultural giant it is today. The next chapter turns the lens back onto the players themselves. The media constructed the mythology, and fans consumed it. Players lived it every day. The stories of those who internalized the league's expectations, who pushed their bodies past breaking points, reveal the most intimate consequences of this culture. Their voices, long silenced by the demands of toughness, now rise as evidence of the true cost of glory. I've often wondered if the true engine of football's brutality was never on the field, but in the stands. The roar of the crowd, tens of thousands of voices rising in unison, has a power that few human experiences can match. That energy doesn't just lift players, it pushes them to sacrifice. Every tackle, every dive across the middle, every collision at the line is performed under the invisible weight of an audience's expectation. And in that sense, fans were never passive witnesses. They were participants in shaping the very culture that demanded toughness beyond reason. When a running back took a crushing hit but staggered back into formation, the crowd erupted. That ovation wasn't just applause, it was a demand. It told the player, "This is what we want. This is what we pay for." Over time, those cheers became as binding as any contract. They built a script players were expected to follow. Be fearless, be unbreakable, be willing to bleed for glory. And players who were already conditioned by coaches and peers found that walking away wasn't simply hard, it was unthinkable. Sociologists often speak of football as America's secular religion. Stadiums are cathedrals, rituals are sacred, and Sunday games resemble worship. But like all religions, there are sacrifices. In this case, the bodies and minds of players became offerings to the collective need for spectacle. Fans demanded the impossible without always acknowledging the price. The concussion crisis, the shredded knees, the shortened lifespans, those realities sat quietly in the background while the scoreboard lit up in celebration. There's a telling irony here. For decades, fans booed when a player lay too long on the turf, as though pain was an inconvenience. Yet the same fans demanded loyalty, courage, and devotion from the men in uniform. To be hurt was acceptable. To show hurt was betrayal. That double standard, be human, but never appear human, permeated every level of the sport. It was not only coaches or owners pressing this standard, it was the culture, and fans were its loudest enforcers. One of the most haunting examples of this came in 1997, when Jets linebacker Mo Lewis leveled Patriots quarterback Drew Bledsoe with a crushing hit that left him with internal bleeding. The crowd gasped, then cheered, then shifted its energy toward the backup Tom Brady, who would go on to define a dynasty. For fans, it was a moment of fate, a storybook pivot. But for Bledsoe, it was nearly fatal. His injury was part of the larger cycle. The end of one man's career became the beginning of another's legend. And the public narrative often forgot the first man's suffering in favor of the story fans wanted to believe. We can also trace the psychology of fandom in how violence was packaged as entertainment. NFL films, with its slow-motion collisions and dramatic orchestral music, didn't just glorify the game, mythologized pain. A linebacker smashing into a running back was presented like two gladiators colliding in an epic duel. Fans consumed these images not as moments of trauma, but as art. The human consequences were reframed as proof of valor. This wasn't deception. It was a kind of cultural alchemy that transformed risk into romance, and fans craved more. That craving drove the league's expansion, its billion-dollar broadcast deals, its stranglehold on Sunday television. But it also created an unspoken complicity. Fans might have suspected the damage being done to players, but acknowledging it would have meant confronting their own role in sustaining the system. So instead, they celebrated comebacks. A player with a broken jaw who returned to play was lionized, not pitied. A quarterback who endured concussions but kept competing was hailed as legendary. These weren't merely sports stories, they were moral lessons about endurance. And the audience applauded because those lessons resonated with their own lives. For fans, football was more than a pastime. It became a mirror of the American ideal: grit, perseverance, triumph over adversity. Cheering for those qualities in athletes reinforced them in the culture at large. But it also blurred the lines between inspiration and exploitation. When Brett Favre played through the death of his father and delivered one of the most remarkable games of his career, fans saw resilience. But when that same Favre later admitted to painkiller addiction and repeated concussions, the story didn't fit the myth as neatly. It's easier to cheer for the warrior than to witness the broken man behind the armor. The psychology of fandom doesn't absolve fans of responsibility, but it does explain the complexity. People love the game not because they enjoy seeing players hurt, but because football captures something elemental about human struggle. The collisions, the strategy, the stakes, these speak to deep instincts about conflict and survival. Yet the darker side of that instinct is the willingness to overlook suffering for the sake of drama, even as medical reports and investigative journalism expose the dangers. The bond between fans and the sport proved nearly unbreakable. Stadiums remained packed. Television ratings soared. The Super Bowl became an unofficial holiday. Fans may have felt guilt or unease, but the pull of tradition, identity, and spectacle was stronger. Supporting a team wasn't just entertainment. It was community, belonging, even heritage passed through generations. Think of a family in Green Bay, braving sub-zero temperatures at Lambeau Field, wrapped in blankets but refusing to miss a single play. For them, the Packers weren't just athletes, they were part of the family's identity, their story, their pride. To question the cost of the game was, in a way, to question themselves. That SY fandom held such power. It bound individuals into a collective narrative where doubt felt like betrayal. And so, the competitive darkness of the NFL was never contained within locker rooms or boardrooms. It extended into living rooms, bars, and tailgates. Fans were the chorus, the echo that kept the machine alive. They demanded sacrifice, celebrated it, and sometimes looked away from its consequences. This doesn't mean fans are villains. It means the system worked because it aligned the desires of all its participants. Owners sought profit, players sought glory, and fans sought meaning. Together, they built a spectacle that could not exist without shared complicity. As the concussion crisis deepened, fans began to wrestle with uncomfortable truths. Could they still cheer knowing the long-term risks? Could they celebrate a devastating hit when it might mean dementia for the man who delivered it? For some, the answer was yes, rationalized by tradition. For others, the answer was no, a quiet distancing from the game. But the majority stayed, acknowledging the danger, yet unable to sever the emotional ties. The psychology of fandom teaches us something critical. Systems of exploitation rarely survive on coercion alone. They thrive because people willingly participate, often because the system gives them something they deeply need. For NFL fans, the game offered identity, pride, and drama. That was enough to justify the risks borne by others. And that's the unsettling truth. The competitive darkness of the NFL was not merely enforced from the top down. It was sustained from the ground up by millions of voices cheering in unison, asking for more. As we reach the edge of this story, it becomes impossible to separate the parts from the whole. Ownership, players, doctors, fans each believed they were acting in their own best interest. Yet together, they sustained a machine that consumed lives, one Sunday at a time. And the deeper we look, the clearer it becomes. The competitive darkness of the NFL wasn't an accident. It was the product of a system that could not, and perhaps would not, stop itself. The owners saw a business with unmatched potential. Television turned the league into a cultural giant, and every violent collision was another opportunity to capture ratings. Profit margins soared, and franchises became family dynasties worth billions. To them, risk management meant minimizing liability, not preventing harm. They knew the product was dangerous, but they also knew the public's appetite was insatiable. And so, as one medical expert put it, the business model of the NFL was built on the calculated gamble that the truth would arrive too late. For players, the equation was both simpler and crueler. They entered the league chasing dreams of wealth, of fame, of proving themselves on the grandest stage. But to stay in the league, they had to submit to its code. Play hurt, play through pain, hide symptoms, risk everything. They weren't just employees, they were gladiators who knew their careers could end with a single injury. Yet the lure of the stage was too powerful to resist. They signed up not out of ignorance, but because they believed the sacrifice was worth it. Only later, after the roar of the crowd had faded, did many begin to ask whether the cost had been too high. Doctors stood in the middle, often caught in conflicts of loyalty. Some devoted themselves to protecting players, but to many became servants of the machine. Their duty was to the athletes, but their paychecks came from the teams. And time after time, the pressure tilted their judgment. To clear a star quarterback on Sunday was to satisfy the coach, the owner, and the fans. To hold him back was to risk being replaced. In a league built on short-term gain, medical caution was a luxury few could afford. The concussion crisis didn't erupt because the science was absent. It erupted because the science was silenced. And then there were the fans, the great engine that powered it all. They were not villains. They were not conspirators. They were human beings who loved a game that seemed to define their communities, their Sundays, even their identities. But their cheers created demand, and demand kept the wheels turning. Every ticket purchased, every jersey worn. Every voice raised in the stadium gave the league its mandate. Give us spectacle, no matter the cost. Together, these groups formed a closed loop. Owners provided the stage, players supplied the sacrifice. Doctors blurred the line between safety and risk. Fans delivered unwavering loyalty. Each element reinforced the others, creating a cycle too strong to break from within. And that is why, even as lawsuits mounted and medical evidence piled up, the NFL endured. The truth was not enough to dismantle the system. Consider the case of Mike Webster, the Pittsburgh Steelers' legendary center. His death in 2002 revealed the first clear evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTEN), a former NFL player. His decline had been brutal. Memory loss, paranoia, chronic pain. By the end, he was living out of his truck, a shadow of the champion who once anchored a dynasty. His story should have been the breaking point, but instead, the machine absorbed it. Owners denied connections. Doctors debated details. Fans grieved, then returned to cheering the next season. The tragedy of one man, even one legend, could not overcome the inertia of an entire culture. The NFL eventually acknowledged the dangers, but always at its own pace, always in language carefully measured to protect the shield. Rules were adjusted, helmets improved, protocols refined. Yet critics argued these changes were not cures, but cover. The collisions remained violent, the careers remained short, and the risks remained profound. For every new safety initiative, there was another player collapsing years later with symptoms of CTE. It was like trying to contain a storm with a paper wall. In the end, the darkness endured not because people failed to see it, but because it was woven into the very fabric of the game. To eliminate it would be to unravel football itself. The collisions that make football thrilling are the same collisions that make it deadly. The toughness that inspires fans is the same toughness that destroys players' bodies. The loyalty that binds owners, coaches, and teams together is the same loyalty that pressures doctors to clear concussed athletes. It is all one system, indivisible, feeding off itself. And that brings us to the uncomfortable truth. The NFL's competitive darkness is not an anomaly. It is the shadow cast by success. For every Lombardi trophy hoisted, there are men in silence who struggle to walk, to remember, to live. For every dynasty celebrated, there are families grappling with loss. And for every fan who finds meaning in the game, there is a player who paid the cost to provide it. Some call it the price of glory, others call it exploitation. But whatever name we give it, the cost is real, and it cannot be ignored. As we prepare to step into the final reflection, we must hold these truths together. The brilliance of the game, the brutality beneath it, and the complicity that binds everyone involved. This is the legacy of the NFL's competitive darkness. And it leaves us with a haunting question, one the league, the players, and the fans will have to answer for themselves. Is the glory worth the cost? As the final whistle echoes and the stadium empties, a strange silence settles over the game of football. The energy that once surged through the crowd. The bone-rattling collisions that drew millions to their screens all fade into quiet. What remains are the stories, the triumphs, the heartbreaks, the legacies written in both glory and pain. And it is in that silence that the true weight of the NFL's competitive darkness reveals itself. We've journeyed through decades of sacrifice, through bodies broken and minds clouded, through the complicity of owners, doctors, and fans. And the picture is clear. Football is not just a sport. It is a cultural phenomenon, a mirror reflecting both the best and the darkest parts of American life. Its beauty lies in the teamwork, the strategy, the pursuit of perfection under pressure. Its darkness lies in the toll it demands for that beauty, the cost of glory measured in human lives. For players, the price is personal. We've heard their stories. Mike Webster living out of his truck as his mind unraveled. Junior Seau. Beloved leader gone too soon. The countless men whose names we may never know who left the game with nothing but scars and memories. These were not failures of character. These were the consequences of a system that equated pain with valor and sacrifice with necessity. For owners, the price was easier to bear. They profited from the spectacle, building dynasties worth billions. But profit often came at the expense of transparency. For years, they fought to obscure the truth, to challenge the science, to protect the shield. Their silence wasn't ignorance, it was strategy. They knew the risks, but they also knew the rewards. And in the balance of business, the suffering of players was a cost absorbed into the margins. For doctors, the price was moral, torn between science and loyalty. Too many chose the path of least resistance, clearing players to return, downplaying symptoms, serving the interests of the team over the health of the individual. Some spoke out, some fought, but the weight of the system often proved overwhelming. In the process, the very oath to do no harm was bent, if not broken. And for fans, the price was complicity. We cheered the impossible, demanded the unthinkable, celebrated the reckless courage of men who played through pain. We did not ask too many questions, because to do so would have tarnished the purity of the spectacle. Football gave us belonging, identity, joy. But it also asked us to look away from the human cost, to accept sacrifice as the currency of entertainment, and most of us did. So where does that leave us? Is football doomed to remain forever trapped in this cycle of brilliance and brutality? Or can it evolve into something better? The truth is complicated. The NFL has made changes. Concussion protocols, rule adjustments, safer equipment. Awareness has grown, and medical research is no longer dismissed. Players are beginning to understand their rights, their risks, and their power. Yet, the collisions remain. The essence of the game, the very thing that makes it irresistible, is also what makes it dangerous. That paradox may never fully be resolved. But perhaps resolution was never the point. Perhaps the meaning of this journey lies not in finding a way to erase the darkness, but in learning to confront it. To acknowledge the sacrifices without dismissing them. To celebrate the game without romanticizing its costs. To recognize that behind every highlight reel is a man with a family, a body, a mind, and that those should never be treated as expendable. The competitive darkness of the NFL tells us something larger about ourselves. It shows us how far we're willing to go for glory, how much we value spectacle. As elite, we can accept suffering when it serves our desires. It challenges us to ask difficult questions. Why do we cheer? What do we reward? And what do we owe to the men who give everything to play this game? In the end, the story of football is the story of America itself. Ambitious, relentless, resilient, but shadowed by the costs of its own success. It is a story of triumphs that inspire and tragedies that haunt, of communities united by pride and families shattered by loss. It is a reminder that greatness always carries a price and that the bill does not always come due on the field. As the lights dim and the echoes fade, one truth remains. Football is more than just a game. It is a test of endurance, a theater of human will, a reflection of a nation's hunger for glory. But it is also a reminder that glory, in its purest form, is never free. It is bought with sweat, with blood, with years stolen from lives that might have been. So the question lingers, haunting, unresolved. Will we remember only the trophies and the triumphs? Or will we also remember the men who bore the weight of the darkness so that the rest of us could cheer? That is the true cost of glory. And it is a cost we can no longer afford to ignore.